Welcome to Pure Signal, where we cut through the noise to bring you what matters in tech. I'm Vincent Yates, the global chief data scientist. I've been the chief data scientist at GE, head of data science at Uber and Microsoft, and I bring to you the data and analytics perspective. With me today is Jason Goth, our CTO of Credera. He's our systems development and operations expert, knows everything about technology and how to build them at robust scale. And Kevin Erickson, our North America CEO and our business strategy expert. Between us, we've built mission critical systems at dozens of the top Fortune 100 companies. We're here to filter through the most important developments in technology through the lenses of data, operations, and strategy to give you actionable insights about your business. Let's get into it. Today, I want to talk about what's happening in the services business. Broadly speaking, we can use Credera and consulting as a specific instance, but more broadly, all of services. We've seen for the past, what would you say, decade, roughly, PE firms going in and buying up these largely disparate businesses across lots of geographies, rolling them up, centralizing operations from IT to marketing to HR, packaging them up, and then reselling them, spinning them back off. And I've only seen an acceleration in the number of industries that they're really pursuing with services. So it started off as small things, whether it be cleaning services, whether it be lawn care services. We're now seeing that actually penetrate deeply into consulting, as an example. One investor, Griffin, for example, has bought up 6 different sort of boutique consulting firms that each had a different channel partner as their play, and they're now packaging that up and presuming to spin that back out ultimately. I think that the fascinating thing to me is that they have not done this because of AI. They actually did this largely before AI. However, we're now seeing maybe a different play start to emerge, and I want to get into that. But before we do, maybe we start off with that broader topic. Kevin, I know you've spent a lot of time working with PE firms generally. How are they thinking about this investment thesis if you had to guess from the outside?
Talking about the pre or post?
Pre-AI,
Yeah,
pre-JI.
pre-AI was, bunch of different angles on that. It also depended on the size, but some of it was just roll up a cash-based business was one theme. There's been a theme of really baby boomers as they retire and don't have a logical place to go. That was clearly part of the thesis for a lot of like the mom and pop different services, trades, all that. Yeah, it's and just really, I think with pre or post AI technology, it's a lot easier to be able to kind of bring those together, and you still have the operational end that still happens with the last mile to the customer, but can definitely streamline those other elements of that. Also, it's like a bit of it's like where does investment dollars go? So I think those are some of the different themes, and you've seen so much dry powder go into private equity or these type of funds. I mean all the major kind of financial institutions have elements that act like this, and so I think a lot of it is like we have to find a place to go. I think what is interesting now with not to get ahead of it, but I think some of the AI components of that is like it really in some ways accelerates one, how do you find them, to some of those back office enterprise savings, all those elements actually are just accelerated with AI, because a lot of the same reasons of what they were trying to do to centralize ops are just you're able to do that more. So I
Right.
think it's intriguing, but I do also think there's just a significant amount of capital that's available, more needs than there is, I think, opportunities, and so it's partly what you're seeing too.
Got
But
it.
those are more historical lens.
Yeah, with that historical lens, a lot of that centralizing the
Yeah,
back office stuff, effectively the things you need to run your business, but aren't terribly critical to your end customers. They're just necessary.
right.
Jason, I'm curious from your standpoint, from a systems perspective in particular, do you see that typically work in that way? I know you've worked with many PE firms too. You've helped actually consolidate some of those tech stacks more broadly. Do they actually realize the efficiencies that you would imagine in that scenario? Or is it just too expensive and difficult and slow, frankly, to migrate and unify all of those legacy systems?
Well, I think you do for the smaller ones. I mean, when you have smaller businesses, they're just not that hard to roll up and squeeze the, duplication out of. I think where you've traditionally seen it difficult is when they're much larger businesses, larger businesses with significant number of systems, significant number of data. Those tend to be harder, but we have seen those work, and we've done some of them, where you're migrating large, ERP and CRM systems, together. So they can work. You just have to be very, very diligent and on top of things. And I do think that, AI is going to radically improve that, both time and quality, or, the number of successful ones, I'll say, improve their likelihood as well as greatly reduce the time. So I think there's a huge opportunity for the private equity firms to, I'd say, have more winners than, some of these that have, been larger, but traditionally not been able to, get the advantages, the economies of scale.
Sure. Yeah, I guess, from a data standpoint, it's of course critical to actually integrate these data sources. I mean, if you take something simple like your CRM, the first thing inevitably that you're going to want to do at an acquisition is figure out, hey, where do we have overlapping customers? Where's the cross-sell opportunities on both customer databases? And where are we both jointly pursuing already that we can double down collectively and make sense of that? So, of course, consolidating those systems is the first thing we do. And I can just tell you from my days of Yammer, when I was tasked with when we got acquired by Microsoft, hey, go figure out what systems we have and map it to their customer base. Of course, Microsoft being way bigger, we had to map to them. But it was incredibly difficult. I mean, the nuance here is non-trivial. So if we take an example like Disney, Disney has 1 million email addresses and domains. So if you just took them and you mapped it down to the domain name, well, there's Disney, there's Playdom, things they've acquired. Then, of course, there's all of the operations teams that have different email address and domains, and then one for every country. So Disney.com, .fr, et cetera, et cetera. It becomes a rather difficult task because if I see a Kevin.Erickson, assuming emails are full, at Disney.com, and I see a Kevin.Erickson at Disney.fr, are they the same person? Are they not the same person? It's really difficult. But once you resolve that, it becomes incredibly useful and helpful for that business. I know, Kevin, of course, Credera's gone through several acquisitions at this point, and consolidating those systems was a big portion of the value play as well. How do business leaders generally approach that, again, pre-AI at least? How do you choose which of these to do first? Of course, I said CRM is one of the first, but how do you think about that?
Yeah. I'll answer that question. I also want to come back to a little bit of interesting is whereas that with onset of more AI-based systems that have stripped out some of the cost efficiencies in the back office, like some of the easy money when you
Right?
start to consolidate, it's already be gone. So it's
Yeah.
going to be actually interesting. I think some of the dynamic will change, but as we often say, it depends. I mean, I think it depends on what the business is, right? So if you're looking at, hey, it's a large service business and you have a lot of employees, well, then you're going to look at the employee systems, how you work through that. If you're a service business has got a lot of customers, it means CRM. So I think it's starting to look at really what drives probably how you make money. If you're a professional service firm that's making money on, doing consulting or auditing or creative or whatever else, well, that's going to be a different systems you're going to go after versus I'm rolling up HVAC companies, for example.
Sure.
And so I think you'd start just where the low hanging fruit is. But I think it's an actually interesting point that I don't know if I completely thought about. Just I think over time, the bloat that's in those back office systems in companies are going to be gone.
Mhm.
And so it's going to be interesting to see the easy money, so to speak, of centralization. You'll probably end up more on really the customer and marketing elements because that's still where the investments will play.
Sure.
So how do you have your ability to understand the customer and what they're doing, and so then you can use all the on demand based marketing techniques and pricing that's going to allow you to do that. I mean, I think that's where, again, if we use my prior to Credera life where I was doing in the trades, those type of roll ups, like for that, it's really going to be around using the technology tools to how do you improve what you're selling, how quickly you sell, how you find the customer, how do you deliver, how do you improve estimating, all those normal stuff. It's an interesting question of like, well, who owns that data between the service provider local, well, now it's the OEM, and it's going to be a lot easier for the manufacturer, so to speak. How do you have that make sure you get the equipment where it needs to be? So it's actually a really fun time. I mean, I know we keep on saying that, right? It's a fun time to be alive because there's all these different things that are coming after. But I think probably why you're rolling up, what you're trying to do with it is still going to ultimately depend where you go first to try to get the efficiencies.
Yeah, makes sense. And I guess, Jason, from your standpoint, I mean, you've done these things where we've gone into clients before who have hugely different supply chain and procurement systems and consolidate them down. And you've realized massive savings. Is that still the case today from your standpoint? Is that one of the first places to go after? Or is it more on the marketing, customer acquisition side? Do you have any ideas from a technology standpoint?
Well, I think it's always been more on the, revenue. I mean, cost and efficiencies are great long term, but like immediate term, you can always do cross sell, upsell, and that's where people tend to start. Especially if someone buys an air conditioning business and a plumbing business, there's a lot of potential upsell, cross sell there. They don't even need to really be integrated, right? They just need to be, get good data and activate on those, you know, common customers or non-common customers, I guess it would be. But when it comes to, eventually, you need to get things into those customer databases, into your customers into the same CRM or whatever customer management system. It just because over time it gets too hard to continue to do all of that manual, cross sell, upsell, and try to get additional revenue. So yeah, that's typically where we see, things outside of the standard, email and kind of email finance back, desktop support, that kind of stuff. But, that's really more to keep from increasing costs, I would say. There's not really a lot of savings there. That's not significant cost to start with. I guess desktop support, those kind of things, your laptop, your email. So, and it's pretty commoditized, so it's pretty easy to move. So, those things, low hanging fruit, but they don't gain much value. Customer cross sell, upsell, but eventually you got to get the customer data. I think things like supply chain may or may not be even relevant, especially if they're radically different businesses, right?
Mm.
They may not have an opportunity.
I was thinking about the example where we worked with a healthcare client, and effectively by looking through all of their contracts, you were able to get them sort of favored nation status across all their deals and bundle them up into
Yeah.
bigger purchases. There was some real savings there, wasn't there?
Yeah, but they have the same suppliers, same supply chain, same suppliers, same supplies,
Mhm.
right? And so, yeah, that's you can certainly do that. And a lot of times you can do that without even integrating the systems, right? You can just, get the data and go work with those, suppliers to get better pricing. But ultimately you want to get those. But again, I think that's typically later.
Got it. Fair enough. So if the original investment thesis was largely focused on centralizing the back office tasks and doing a better job with marketing and a bit of the IT, but the savings they're there, but they're de minimis, it sounds like, from your perspective, Jason. It sort of begs the question, well, what are they doing now? Why do they keep making this play? And I think part of it goes to your point, Jason, of the cross sell and upsell opportunities. There's no doubt there. Probably a little bit in the consulting space, at least, is the channel partnership. So people who have really great relationship with one vendor and another, that's very synergistic naturally. They can use that cross sell, natural cross sell. But in the world of Gen AI, I wonder, how does this continue to evolve? And in particular, if the cost of integration goes to near zero, or at least decreases significantly, because we can port systems easier than ever. And to your point, Jason, a lot's already commoditized. So maybe there isn't a savings there. I don't know. You can come back to that in a second. Why would you then bundle these things up? Is it really just you're getting a lot more efficiency and you can effectively Twitter a bunch of businesses? You can just go in and every company's going to have their Twitter moment. If I can do that really effectively, then I can, of course, grow the bottom line significantly and spin it back out. Any thoughts, Kevin,
Yeah.
from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I think that you still have to acquire customers. And so some of that's geographic, so again, whether it be, again, trades, professional services, either one, like there's advantage of ultimately where you're interacting with their customers. So I still think there's a place for that. Your delivery, again, if it's a non-trade where you actually have to be in a physical location, but now it's more intellectual capital, well, keep the relationships with the customers where they're at, and then you're able to potentially have easier ways to deliver. And so I think some of it's it's maybe cheaper to acquire customers by actually buying up a business than it's going to be to do different things. And so I think it's just different areas of where you extract value. I mean, ultimately, how that plays out. I think one thing that might be maybe where you were potentially trying to go, I think it's different about the slight nuance between venture capital and private equity. Private equity, where you're working under a time horizon, there's some type of exit, you're trying to squeeze that out. Well, if you got venture capital who may be taking a little bit of a longer type, typically would say more about building than extracting or rolling up. Well, that's a little different play. It might be around buying up, customers, buying up scale, buying up revenue streams, and and some of that's just around growth. Again, we've joked about that with Credera, where we've done easy expansion, right? It's easy to grow by just adding capacity throughout the world versus maybe adding depth and different things like that. And so I think those things will still be there. And I do think that for many businesses, at least in, really both in all the Western world, but as you have people that are leaving the workforce, and how they do that, that creates opportunities. We know there's still a significant amount of owners and executives that will be leaving over the next 20 years. That there's a place for that stuff to go. So I think it's right for that. And then I just also think it's fun. I mean, this is where it goes back to just this idea of how you build a business. Well, one way, there's different ways to build a business, and now this is a different way to build a business. You create rapid scale through consolidation, stripping that out. One of our former clients, and one of my former clients, they were in a very similar businesses across very different domain applications, whether it be childcare services, airlines, and it was always kind of interesting to me because they were, the customer base was relatively separate, the code base, all that stuff. Well, now how easy AI would allow those things to be, even if you kept those separate companies, separate this, it means it's so much easier to be able to cross-market, cross-sell. And I think, that case, they own most of have control of that. But if you look at in another scenario, maybe you're just making it easier to bundle and have more efficient pricing across that. And that's why you'd continue to do that. And you're going to keep on racing a world. We know that everything naturally goes to zero. And so you're just helping accelerate that and eke out a little bit of something along that journey.
Any thoughts, Jason, in particular around, are you seeing a sort of systematic change across the cost of integration thanks to Gen AI? And does that change the calculus from a M&A target standpoint in your mind? Or largely it was already commoditized to the point it doesn't make a huge difference?
Well, I think it depends on the type of acquisition and what the strategy is. I mean, is it, these are adjacent services where we're going to try to cross-sell market? Is it just geographic expansion? There's just different reason private equity acquires new companies. And I think depending on what that is, you can have more or less benefit from it, right? If it's, again, we use another healthcare company that did testing, drug testing, and they acquired companies to do other types of testing. Well, there's a pretty big opportunity there, because they have these, lab management systems, that manage all the equipment and tests, and there was an opportunity to roll that out, significant savings. You have others where they're much different businesses, and those opportunities don't exist. And so I don't know that there's one, one formula that works for everybody, but I will say that, when you do need to integrate or migrate to these systems, AI has been super helpful, especially around things like, you mentioned some of the data cleanup problems. That's always a difficult one. So is it, even just the company, is it Disney in one system and it's, Disney Inc. in another system? Right? Is that how many entities do some of these things have? Well, those, a lot of those data cleanup problems can really be done with AI or machine learning, and that has been a significant savings because it keeps people from having to go back. You either end up with tons of duplicates and someone going through and manually changing, this is the same as that one, and all of that really erodes a lot of the savings. But with some of the tools, you can automate a lot of that, and it really it's been really successful, I think, in a lot of places.
That's an interesting question or point, Jason, where it's being curious to go back and think about just in the general, just take your lifespan or your life cycle of whatever you do. Like, what are the things that pre-AI would have been not effective or non-cost effective to do?
Right.
We know one of the biggest issues in data cleanup is like, is it really worth it to go and figure out, how many Kevin Ericksons there are in 3 cross different systems? So we'd be curious to actually, well, how is that calculus redefined now? And where is there value to extract from that we don't even know that exists? Because before we just would have left it alone.
Well, I think that's the core question that I think we're trying to explore here in my mind is, look, has the calculus of what to buy, whether it be your PE firm or an M&A target for an existing company, has it changed because the costs have gone down? or has it not really because the costs were largely commodity anyway, and so the costs were static? That is to say, if I can integrate at 1/10 of the cost, does that actually open the aperture for my target acquisitions any more, significantly more? I don't know. And that's what I think we're getting to. And it sounds like there are some real savings on the integration side. Maybe not 100%, but there are some. I think that would then say, well, sure, there must be more revenue opportunities because I'm going to buy the customer list, to your point. This is the challenge with any startup. If you think about if you're going to go buy a business and modify or just compete directly as a startup, the startup has to go find those customers. And that's generally and historically been a very slow and expensive process. The second part of my question now to that point is actually, I wonder, do acquisition costs of customers change dramatically? So if I can have some systems, I'll give you one example. I was on LinkedIn the other day. I was doing some research for something that doesn't really matter. There's this woman there that I came across who has, a 0 employee marketing agency. And this is her whole bit. She'll help do marketing for your company. And she has some pretty large company brands. I was impressed with no team at all. When I connected with her on LinkedIn, it was almost an instant acceptance, not terribly surprising, a lot of automation tools for that. But then I got a personalized message to me. And it was like, hey, Vincent, thanks for reaching out. Excited to connect and learn more about the AI Global Council you're on. So not only did it send something, but it had scanned my profile, figured out what was relevant to me, and then actually tailored a message. And of course, that was all AI, very obviously, to me at least, to most people, maybe not. But I thought it was super impressive, super fascinating, just this sort of personalized outreach. So my point is, will acquisition costs of customers go down because it's become so cheap to create the content that no longer is it worth buying customers? I don't know. How do you think about
Or
that?
will it become that just becomes, I mean, it's interesting how rapidly I think just LinkedIn is becoming, just
For sure.
Facebook. It's becoming
Yes.
everything else, right? We talked about
Yes.
that. It's joking. But it seems like it's happening very fast, right? So, all of a sudden, does that just become like my, don't judge my policies, but like go in my once a week Gmail cleanup, and I'm like, haven't I got rid of that? How many times? Who do I have to I will pay someone at this point to get me off this damn list.
Yeah.
It's like yeah, and I'm like, and so what happens when LinkedIn becomes that, or
Mhm.
it's all automated, it's all fake. You'll work through that, so then your AI is going to read through the fake AIs, and just continues this perpetuation of how that goes fast. So, but I do think that goes back to the theme of we're continuing to accelerate to where your preferences and what's going to make you act and what's going to be done on your behalf is
Mhm.
going to be really intriguing. So again, well, what's the part of what's that business model that's interesting for that company? Is it the fact that you're offering a service that's 0 employees, the fact that you're able to acquire customers? But I do think it's possible the tools will help better match. Again, going back to my previous client, again, the core of that business model is matching. Some of your background is the same constructs. Like, can that be done in a more effective and efficient way that just, it seems like logically that would, which then again, I just think most businesses will continue to evolve and scale differently. I do think about different tangent, but I do think about where private equity will go once, I mean, it's kind of like this is rude, but it's kind of like the locusts that come through, they go through different fields every 7 years, and all of a sudden there's nothing more to eat. So they got to go someplace else.
Right.
Like right now. So where is that? What is else? And again, where do you have the most government, efficiencies? Well, everything, all roads lead to government. So, so I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of how that, where you start to realize where so much money is still there. There's not going to be enough private economy left. I just jumped several different themes on that one statement, but I think it is interesting to see where will it go, and then how will continued evolution of tools provide value. But I'm very confident it will continue to evolve, and people will find ways to do that. So
Yeah, no doubt. This is, I think, the evolution. To your point, it's going to continue to evolve. And I guess from my standpoint, what we're seeing across the board. So, Jason, I think you actually shared this paper. I can't remember. Maybe I shared it with you. I can't remember. Somebody shared this paper among our group where Google just went through a huge migration. And they shared the internal stats of how much of that was done with AI. And it saved them 50 to 60% time, and 80-ish% of the code was written by Gemini. Like they wrote 1/5 of the amount of actual lines of code they wrote, and it doubled the velocity of them doing that. And so my point here is, If that trend persists and likely only gets better as these tools continue to improve and we get more use cases, then it seems to me that there's a new area of exploitation in terms of the locust cleaning up the field and bringing efficiency back to the large companies. Any thoughts on that paper, Jason?
Well, we've seen that a lot with even our client base, that they're whether they're migrating, even upgrading, sometimes it comes along, well, we haven't upgraded this version of, Python or whatever. Why not? Because we've got, so many millions of lines of code, and it would be, too painful to upgrade. Well, those upgrades are largely getting automated. Migrations to clouds. There's just tons of things that, you're able to do with the AI tools that it's always how, legacy systems, come about. You're not able to update them. You're not able to upgrade them. It's never a priority. Oh, it's going to cost too much. The technical debt and legacy just builds up and up and up. And if you're able to even automate that, so, we're working with one client now where, there's a migrated version. Well, we're still testing, all of the automation to upgrade the version of the platform. There's still changes being made, right, on the old version, and an agent just sucking those in every night and just running all the tests, right? And so there's all kinds of things you can do to really, really improve the quality of your systems. Whether, this really has nothing to do with whether it's, part of an acquisition or not. I mean, you should be doing that right now. That goes back to Kevin's earlier point, I think, which is if people start doing that, is there going to be a lot of, some of the value of an acquisition not there? I actually think it will go the other way. If things are, to your point, if things are cleaned up, and more modern and updated and less technical debt, then I think there's going to be opportunities to do things you wouldn't have done, right, otherwise, because it's just been too costly.
I think that's exactly right. And I think this then leads to, from my standpoint, one of the two main areas that if I were a PE firm or if I were a large company looking for acquisition targets, I would go after organizations that have a huge amount of tech debt, especially ones where their business is still doing fine and there isn't a strong impetus in the industry to actually go in and modify it. So if I think of your favorite domain, Jason, we spend a lot of time, airlines as an example, they have really old legacy systems still running on mainframes, and it works really well.
Some. Most.
Most. Okay, fine. Most. And it works to the point. It works really well. It's a really complex problem. The thing they have now already works. It's not broken. Why fix it? And I guess organizations like that then become a very different acquisition target in my mind. Now, again, airlines have a whole different asset-heavy business that changed the calculus a little bit in that specific example, but things like this, because now the cost of actually updating that system goes from years, if not a decade probably, and hundreds of millions of dollars to maybe a year or two and tens of millions of dollars. And that to me changes the calculus dramatically.
Yeah. Well, continue go down the path I didn't want to go down before around, you think about airlines and think government. So let's think about all the stuff going on with the FAA right now in terms of,
Right.
Newark and New York and all that stuff. I talk about an industry that absolutely needs to be modernized, but they can't because it's almost like it's crazy that your risk calculus of having something that was built 50 years ago break is actually, it's a better risk calculus than I build something now through automated tools and something happens and I get sued for $1 gazillion, right? It's like,
Right.
so or the time it takes, for us to do a federal contracting scenario will be another 35 years. And so it's like, you're looking at it's like a train wreck you're just watching happen right in front of us. And I think that somewhere someone's going to have to come in, and I think obviously technology is going to be part of that, but it's a really interesting investment thesis of looking at that, not only in terms of old technology, but then probably, just areas where what's the equivalent of the radiology example? Like, you have a lot of different data, you're looking for anomalies within that and how that plays across the spectrums. But yeah, this is also, then there becomes a hopeful tale. Again, I'll keep on using government as my file, just the fodder here is, you get to the point to where you have to do something. Maybe in this case, they actually got lucky because we get lucky as society because you're going to be able to use tools that will make it so much more faster than the reasons why you haven't done that. But it always is going to come back to where I think it's going to be interesting on any of these tools is what's the degree of risk that you're willing to take. And I think that I'm still intrigued by, do we become more risk tolerant just in nature because of the fact that we're going to have all these different tools that are going to be much more efficient to run somewhat on sleep mode. And you know, even if you do all the testing, all those things that Jason just talked about, you know, behind the scenes, but like, my view is yes. I think it's life's going to be too expensive not to, and you're going to have to be. But it's going to be interesting watching it and quite literally hope that there's not unintended negative consequences that occur while the transition occurs.
That's right. And I think, you know, this is the next question I want to get to largely, which is like, why aren't people doing it more? And to your exact point, I remember one of our clients, we wrote some algorithms to help them automate an underwriting process at a financial institution. So we wrote algorithms like just automatically do this whole transaction and then underwrite it effectively and issue the money. The question from that team was, well, what kind of guarantees can you give me about it being 100% accurate? And I said, I can guarantee it will not be 100% accurate. And they said, well, it's unacceptable. And I said, well, why is that? They said, well, we can't make any errors. And I said, well, look, you're spending $20 million a year with your entire staff reviewing each one of these one by one. And undoubtedly, there are some opportunity costs for the slowness with which you move. I can guarantee this system will err less than $20 million a year. So take the $20 million of savings, put it aside, call that your reserve, and anything that we get wrong, you'll take out of the reserve and you'll still come out money ahead. And it took a while for them to believe us and think that way. But ultimately, they did realize that there's just the simple math that they should be taking more risk. They're way too risk adverse, and it's costing them a lot of money. And I think this comes down to the core question, which is why aren't people doing it? And I think it has something to do with that. But I'm curious from your guys' take, Jason, especially from a technology standpoint, why aren't people being more risk-seeking in your experience and doing these things that seem so obvious to the outsider?
Well, before I answer that, I want to go back to the setup, because I think there's two different things. Like, one is, you know, take government, for example. Well, not everything is air traffic control or train control, right? You know, there are a lot of systems that are just not as safety or mission critical. You know, the Doge, the Doge example of retirement was where I was going to go. Yeah, you know, and that I think they, you know, have largely automated all that, right? So, you know, and for every one mission critical system, there are probably a handful of non-mission critical. Why don't, you know, I think there is a effort to go do that. You say, well, why haven't we done those? Well, again, I think they're old. They've never been updated. You know, the longer you wait to, you know, it's deferred maintenance. It's just like your house. You know, you don't do anything in your house, and then after 20 years, the bill to get it fixed, to get it sold, is enormous. And so, you know, I think, you know, it's really easy to kick the can down the road and make that someone else's problem, not have to try and fix all of those things. Eventually you have to. And I think that's what a lot of those systems, especially within the government, are running into. So in the specific example you gave around like, well, we can't have any errors, we had that come up just a couple of weeks ago with a client where we were looking, you know, it's the one where we're looking to do some of the automated upgrades with AI. And the same question came up, and they're like, well, how do we know that the AI is going to make the change right? And my answer to that is like, how do you know a human is going to make it right?
Right.
You know, and the answer is we run a test, right? We write tests for these things. We test the software. And if it passes the test, like, you know, there are probably, you know, what do we always say, that your test doesn't prove the absence of errors, just their presence, right? And so, you know, we pass all the tests, great. There's probably a bunch of undiscovered, you know, errors and bugs in there. Are there more errors and undiscovered bugs if AI does it than if a person does it? I actually probably think not. I think that people probably create more. But regardless, you know, if they're found, we write a test for it, right? And eventually, you get to where it is not, not a problem or not worth fixing. Now, again, that's a much higher bar if it's a mission critical system. For most systems, it's not that important. If your expense system has an error that happens one of every million expense reports submitted, right, you'll deal with that. And I think the answer is exactly what you said, which is money. It's like people are just realizing that the savings are so great. We cut 80% out of the time to upgrade that system. And so if we're cut 80% out of time and cost, we can live with potentially a few more errors, or potentially not if we can't find them.
This is where, I think two thoughts that come to my mind. One is just it's always around what's your incentives.
Mhm.
To go back to why don't we make system changes and things like that in large systems or government or not? Well, partly it's because the incentive in a government scenario, this is a bit of a negative or snarky perspective, and I acknowledge that, is it's to keep the money, it's to keep the job, it's to keep the spending, right? Like that's the primary objective. It's not
Right.
actually efficiency. It's not actually better customer service. It's like, we have to have these
How many
different jobs.
directs do I have?
Yeah. So it's the incentives are, so you got to change the incentive. Similarly, I think there's some interesting, because there's just there's some tort reform laws that are going on in Texas and other places right now. I do think that the tort element of this is really real, in terms of the personal negligence. We saw a large case in California of huge settlement for a really normal accident. There's a risk element that we have to be willing to take just as part of being in a world that we can't control. Obviously, you're seeing this with autonomous driving, all these elements we're continuing to butt up against this, and we're going to have to be more risk accepting, knowing that there's whole business models that exist trying to profit on normal probabilistic accidents that occur or whatnot. There's got to be a way to stop negligence. But so I don't know where this is going to go, but we're going to keep on bumping up against that. And again, this has been from the start of time, right? Some of that's fear change, some of that's opportunistic. But I do think that, trying, and then really frankly, even AI makes it easier to exploit these different things, right? One of the cases in Texas, right? There's a particular jurisdiction that has, certain elements that, they're more favorable for certain type of lawsuits. Well, AI just makes it easier to find those different areas. And, of course, we're, whole probabilistic of business and human nature is to find where you can arbitrage. And, if you think of that as an arbitrage,
Right.
finding the right place to do that. And I think that we're going to have to work through that. And so I don't know how to change any of that, but it's just acknowledging that exists. But I do think ultimately when it comes to some of the public sector stuff is that the costs of the populace is so great that it's going to be forced to change at some point. There's just not enough, money to get. But and this is where it goes back to now, how does companies look at this? Well, I think again, you go back to where can you find new ways to again, you arbitrage. Where do you find ways for savings? Where do you get exploitation? Where can you grow? How can you go in different areas? Like, one of the things I was just, even right before we started recording today, I was dealing with something where I'm like, fundamentally something that existed just because that's the way it was done before. And I just, well, where do you interject thinking and just say, do you need to do this the same way anymore? And there's a lot of different, and I think that that's one of the things that's crazy about, my role now is like, I feel like, man, I spent a lot of time just trying to make sure we're actually willing to rethink or question what we've done in ways that are productive. I mean, I go back, think again from Adam Grant's book, that construct, are we willing to revisit? And I think that technology and other things really allow, maybe force you. I think how companies start to really value and get value from these tools is going to be reimagining what you thought was possible and having it be a systematic approach to how you go and bring just as just as we were talking about, and we'll get to this next, but just as personal productivity continues to expand and how you use technology and AI tools to drive that, you have to rethink how you live your day, how you work your day. Well, I think companies have to do that writ large. Well, this is the way we did it. We've always done it this way. This is the way we've always onboarded interns. This is the way we've always acquired a new customer. This is the way we've always.
Right.
And I mean, I think the companies that are going to win are the ones that are questioning, why do I have to do it that way? And there's nothing new about that. I mean, I think this is why innovative companies have won forever. But I think it's your pace and the risk of not doing it, I think, is accelerated right now. So,
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I was doing an interview just this week for an article talking about the training with AI and labor in particular, what are the implications? And one of the things I highlighted was exactly what you said. The most important trait of successful people and organizations at this moment is that innate curiosity or that critical thinking, whatever you want to call it, first principles thinking. This, I believe, is precisely what made Elon so successful in such remarkably different domains. I mean, he's a smart guy, and I'm sure there's a lot of other reasons, but one of the common traits is that he asks that question all the time. Why, from a first principles, physics based almost reason, do we do it this way?
Yeah.
Show me why we cannot, from a first principles, physics based reason, do it a better way. Until he sees that, he doesn't accept it. And I think that level of rigorous intellectual thinking is going to be what sets organizations apart, because we're the first ones to realize that we're no longer in the manufacturing setting of boilers where big heavy equipment is sit right next to the boiler. We have electricity. We can reorient that factory however we want to. You can put the big piece of heavy equipment wherever you want in that assembly line. It doesn't make a difference. So how do you redesign the entire fabric of your organization, every part of that value chain, to take advantage of that fact? And I think only the companies that think deeply from first principles will be there.
Yeah. Well, just in societies too. I mean, not to go into, I feel like we're tapping into all the taboos, but like it's just the way, at least in America, how we do education. I mean, I think
Right.
the education is so predicated towards really a manufacturing kind of process flow, teach the test, whatever else. Like this whole construct of continuous learning. Like you guys both are STEM. You guys come from that scientific perspective. I come from a bit more of a liberal arts perspective, but they're both based on questioning, inquiry, study, thinking. As it's birthday season at the Erickson household, and so it's like it's my daughters are growing. Like, and how do we continue to go from as they're now preteens, and it's like, man, I want them to learn to think. Like, I mean, that's like
Right.
the most critical. One of the most critical things is how do you question and ask and explore and use all these amazing tools that you have at your fingertips, but like it still fundamentally begins with, are you willing to think and work through that? And so much of what I think is out there in the mass, everything is actually trying to submit to this idea you don't have to think, right? And so I think that the companies and individuals will win when you do that. And one of the beautiful thing of it is, again, is we've welcomed a new hire class this week, interns next week. Like, it's actually really easy to encourage people to think and ask. And I was talking to our new hires, and I was actually encouraging them that them asking questions to our team is actually invigorating to our team. Just the whole simple of the curiosity of like asking why you're doing that. That's part of what you get to bring into a new organization, is that it's fresh lenses, and sometimes fresh lenses from just very different degrees of experience is actually really helpful.
Yeah, no doubt.
Maybe we need to do another whole pod on the whole education and how do you learn in this environment impact. I think that'd be really fascinating. I saw Arizona State, did a press release where they're redoing all of their curriculum and approach, or to include AI or around AI. I'd like to read it and see what they're doing, because it is one of the challenges, I think, is how do you learn when so much can be, just given the answer, right? And it's calculators are probably the stereotypical example, right? We always use calculators and they make things fast, and we should all use them, or spreadsheets, but we still learn how to add and do long division and those kind of things. And then, once you have the knowledge, the foundation of what you're doing in theory, then we, go ahead and use the calculator. But how do we do that, in a way so that we are thinking? Because I agree with you, Kevin. It's, if you're just going to get an answer, there's really no benefit, because everybody else can get the answer. It's, can you use the tools in a novel way to create something that not anyone else has thought of, right? And that I think is the creativity or the critical thinking aspect that where we can really see a lot of leaps and bounds, not just removing memorization, because again, the calculator doesn't drive any strategic differentiation.
I think that's right. And I think this is the thing that's facing consulting. If I take the meta point of what you just said, Jason, the thing that's facing consulting that I think seems so scary is that one of the big reasons that companies hire consultants is the asymmetry of information. That is, consultants that they hire, they want to know that you've solved this exact problem in their industry before, at least once, ideally many times. And what they're buying then is sort of the experience and the knowledge that you have of how to do that well. In the world of generative AI, that erosion of the information advantage is significant. And I think then the question is, wait a minute, do I need you still? Like if I can write my own strategy growth play or my own acquisition strategy or my own whatever, and I get all of the insights from what you know and maybe more, do I need consultants at all? And I think this is one of the core questions that people are wrestling with broadly. I think the answer is still yes.
Yep.
But I think it's also why you see this new pivot in consulting specifically around how do we build a really sticky relationship that's more than I just happen to know everything about your business and all your competitors' businesses. And so you see people like Unity advisors going around and building a platform first kind of business where you're effectively buying their software. And you see Palantir with all of their stuff, all their technology, all their data stores, et cetera, doing the same thing. They say, look, we're going to come in and we'll be sort of a professional services team to help you with the right strategy. We'll help you implement our tool. They don't keep buying our tool from us, and that becomes the sticky bit of their relationship. I guess the question is, is that really going to be the evolution with AI? Is it too early to tell? Do you have any perspectives on how businesses, like consulting or otherwise, but how services businesses will differentiate themselves from their competitors in a world where it all just becomes something of a commodity from the outside, at least the way we do it today?
Go back to something I said earlier today. It's just, in a very, maybe, I don't know, negative perspective of the world, everything's just become commodity, right? Yeah, I've hired a consultant because I want domain knowledge. I want to be able to do it. I want to hire a consultant because it's scale. I want to hire a consultant because you can do this at arbitrage pricing throughout the world. Like,
Right.
I think it's just continuing to figure out what that is.
Yeah.
What's the value that you're going to offer? There's always going to be the value of outside thinking, of experience. How much of what we offer our clients is based on experience, specific problem? It's just interesting thinking about it. How much of it is based on the fact that sometimes it takes outside perspective just to have the time to work on a problem because you're too busy making sure the planes run on time. And I think that there's a little bit of elements of that, but I think what the trick is you have to continue to evolve.
Yeah.
And what we sell and what we do, just even you were talking before, Vincent, today, just around the elevation of the technology. We've talked about this before where the whole onset of cloud and how much that changed technical development and changed the pricing of technology consulting projects is a very easy example where 40% of the cost of a project went out overnight, and yet things always stayed the same. And I think there'll be more disruption here, but I think it's going to be different values. I think it's also going to be interesting now, going back to your example about your LinkedIn marketing friend. It is possible that the evolution of the gig economy, which is like gig economy means I do one people things, now comes that you actually have human agents and real agents and all this stuff all starts to come together, that the barriers of entry become down, that your options of providers are going to be different. But I think, again, it goes back to the premise. Do we believe that things will grow? If you believe in a pie that gets bigger, which I obviously do, I just don't know where these possibilities would go. If you believe in a pie that's fixed, well, then, yeah, you'd be scared to death right now. I think that simple perspective is a huge element of what people view this problem as.
Yeah. All right, Jason, I took your bait on this one. Any other comments before I get us back on track and we wrap up here?
Nope.
No. Okay. Last question then. Last question then for you guys.
Wow, he's a lot less wordy when he's not here.
Well,
I know. He's like, you guys, my fishing, it's starting to get sunset here. I need to get out on the fishing. Like, let's wrap this thing.
I've got this new AI tool. It's helping me find where the boats are. It tells me exactly where the fish are on this particular date at this time.
He doesn't need AI. He has an actual scanner. You just see the fish, right, Jason?
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Last question for you guys before we wrap here. I want to come back to where we were a minute ago before I took the divergent tangent there that we had, which is really like, if there's all this new opportunity, broadly speaking, and we've seen it in production in real life, our customers, and heard about others as well. So we know it's real. It's not just an illusion at this point. Some is, but we've seen real value. What do you think the blocker is for CEOs, and how do you overcome that as a CEO? And of course, with all of our CEO clients, like where do you think this issue is coming from?
Well, first of all, it's like we're working with knuckleheads like yourselves. I mean,
Yeah, no kidding. Jeez, how do you
I
deal
mean,
with
that's how much of my time is spent just like, oh my goodness, can I
wrangling? Jeez,
keep this team aligned? Yeah,
no doubt.
yeah. And or can I keep other people aligned? I don't. Maybe I will flip it around. Is like, I think that we end up spending so much time it's non-productive.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's firefighting, it's issue resolution, it's working through this stuff, and I think that what I'm hopeful for, and maybe just even a bit aspirational, as in just now, as some of the honeymoon stage of my role, and this is that I yearn for more time to think. I yearn for when we can work together on solving complex problems. Like there's just so much just normal noise associated with running operations that I think that the successful CEOs know how to carve out time. They know how to maximize time. Time is still the number one scarce, most precious thing out there. And so how you use that, how you work through that, I think becomes the successful. I think that's one of the things that's also interesting about Musk is his prioritization of time is really not sustainable for maybe anyone besides him and the teams that the wake that he leaves behind him. But there is something actually elegant about the fact that we're going to stay in this conference room until we solve this problem. And I don't care if it takes 10 hours, 36 hours, 120 hours, and the ability of the entrepreneur to have him be able to do that. I think that how you can learn back that concept, and you've heard me say this particular point before, but keep going back to something that was said 2 generations ago, before the early onset of digital. Peter's kind of management, one of the original management consultants, saying, if a CEO doesn't have half their day as white space, you can't operate effectively. And I would submit there's not very many CEOs that have 4 hours of white space in a month, let alone in a week or a day. And so I think that becomes this whole construct of focus in what you do and how you can lead your teams to focus is going to be where people are won or lost. And the good news is that I think there's a lot of opportunities for companies and individuals to find ways to do that. And hopefully, companies will find the right balance between, trust for their employees and, trying to dictate what they need to do too. I think that's going to be interesting too. So,
Yeah, I think that's great. And the other thing I'm curious about from your perspective is you've obviously made a huge evolution over the past, I don't know, in months. I don't know exactly how many months, but you've never doubted sort of the AI stuff, but you haven't leaned in as much as I've seen you recently. Was there something in particular that you found to be particularly effective? I know with some of our clients, for example, the sort of Tiger team sitting with you doing your job has been a big breakthrough. Was there anything in particular that you would leave to our audience of, if you're struggling, here's something you can do to make it maybe easier?
yeah, I think well, both maybe for, I'd say for a company and just even for me personally, I think there's some of it's just you fight the fire that's in front of you. And so some of it's like you get to it, but I do think it goes back to that curiosity and growth mindset. I think as things go, everyone's on a different adoption curve, whether that be for consumer products, company products, how you live your life. And I think that for me personally, it's been, you knew it was coming, it was going to impact it. Okay, where are we going to be? Are we in a position as a company to make the investments necessary to be in a certain spot in that wave? And frankly, I didn't think we were, for lots of different reasons. We didn't have the energy and appetite to do that. Well, then now you kind of ride that wave, and where we're at and what we have to do. I think it becomes you fix the stuff you have to fix, and now you're here. And I think that's part of what the critical is. But also, I do think it's exciting what you can accomplish and what you can imagine right now, and what you can. Yeah, and I think for our particular business that's evolved, again, geographically and other things, like right now, I think it's fun to solve complex problems. And it's fun to have really smart people that get motivated to work together to do that. I think AI tools enable that. I don't think AI tools take away. And I think it's been coming out of post-COVID where, there was such a labor shortage and all these different things that it changed the calculus of how companies run. Well, right now, for the first time in probably 5 or 6 years, companies can really go back to an idea that says, no, it's going to be hard, and we're going to find people that want to do hard things. And I think that's, at least for a business like ourselves, like that's really exciting. It's a lot more motivating to be able to find people that want to go and, well, do whatever it takes to solve a complex problem versus the person who's wondering, why do I have Pepsi versus Coke in my refrigerator? And you have to manage both. I'm not knocking the person who wants that question, but like, I think at least for us and probably many firms that are based on human capital and kind of more intellectual driven pursuits, I probably are finding themselves enjoying a bit more getting back to where we're kind of find folks that want to go after complex things and want to build versus we just need people. And so, I would challenge all our listeners, our employees, like be excited to grow and let that be the currency that you drive under versus other things.
It's amazing. And just for those who are wondering, I'm on the Buffett train here, Diet Coke all the way. So just for the record, Jason, from your standpoint, anything that you've seen really leaders do to help them get over that initial hump, because they are fighting the tyranny of the urgent every single day. And it is more work to go learn these new tools. And it's frankly a bit overwhelming. There's so many of them that do so many different things. You hear all these stories, but I don't even know where to start. Anything you've seen to be really effective that you would leave with our listeners?
Well, we have done the Tiger team thing where we set with teams and help them where, a lot of these tools are like Excel, right? It's the analogy I use. You can go sit in an Excel class, but I thought I knew Excel, and then you go meet, someone from an investment bank that works in analysis at investment bank, and what they do with Excel is, it's not even like we're in the same room. And so, a lot of the tools are that way, and they do require some, practice, experience, expertise. And so we've had, done some of the kind of, we call them Tiger teams, but it's the, have someone sit and work with your teams to do that. That's been really successful. To the bigger point, I think it's really just squeezing the waste out, right? All the way back to the PE firm, like, squeeze the waste out of your day and out of your systems. There was I can't remember, there was a famous study that Hewlett Packard did around the printer business and the software development and the amount of software development. And it was something like only 5% of all the software development went to actually building anything new and valuable. Everything else was fighting fires, fixing bugs, like doing things that were just repetitive tasks that no one ever automated. And it's just waste. There's a great book about it, about how they shifted the focus and they spent, I think 2 or 3 years focusing on driving those things out. I can't remember the name of that book. Well, I'll find it. We'll put it in the link when the pod releases. But they got to where, just in a couple of years where they, 40%, 40 cents out of every dollar was going towards new development. That's like an 8x increase. And, if we were 8x more productive just by removing waste, like what could we do?
Yeah, I think it's great. And I would say the Tiger team has been really effective. I've seen that across several clients now, that you can just sit with those executives for even half a day and just say, what are you doing? Let's just do it together using AI.
Yeah.
I found them to be really effective, Bradley.
Yeah, that'd be fun to, I don't know if we'll come back to this context, but I've just really been a leap for me this week on that kind of knowing that some of our clients now are asking for that service, or you were talking about the executive coach of one of our clients, like just as an executive or just even as, a busy person, like viewing, a AI driven productivity coach to help you really think about that is almost like for me the equivalent of a personal trainer or some other elements of like, and I hadn't thought about that before, like that. You think about, again, if time and health and some of those elements are the most scarcest things that we have, and this is a way to do that, I think is it shifts from like it was a competitive advantage to do this to now it's almost a survival extinction level event if you don't do it, to almost like how fun is it? Like, I mean, that's kind of going back to my own personal, like what am I doing today that you could do differently? And I think that it does take people to coach, takes people to work through that. Obviously, I benefit from both of you showing and seeing the areas that you do that. I think that, companies that take that same approach are going to really excel. And I think there'll be a market for those services. And again, I think probably the realm of what even companies offer, like in our business, is going to be still consultative service projects. Well, there could be other areas that you naturally go into that's going to allow to make this be, fast follow type stuff.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing example. Yeah, we were talking to this executive coach for a large Fortune 10 company. She coaches the top 50 executives there. And we were working with her on a workshop we're doing. And she was just saying how great it was to just sit with a CEO and just show him how to use these tools, which fits with a lot of our, I don't know even the name of this offering precisely, but this Gen AI in a day. It's kind of like the dashboard in a day concept from back in the Tableau days to we're just going to come and sit with you and actually do your work with you with these tools. And we'll just show you live, to your point, like a personal coach. And it's definitely a wild world, and it is a bit overwhelming, but it's also amazing how well these tools can work when in the right hands, to your point, Jason.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining me on this journey of PE rollup to Gen AI rollup to the government apparently. Any final signals to leave with our audience today?
Just
go update your legacy systems.
Go update your legacy systems. There you go. That's fun. That's inspiring. I think just enjoy the journey, enjoy the learning, and be excited about that. And I think that's in all different roles. I think that's what it is. And you go back to even as we kind of have rebranded towards pure signal, and some of that is part of understanding what is the signal that's most important to you and in your organization, and how do you focus on that and use tools and other things to drive away the noise.
Yeah, no doubt. I would say, look, if you're doing anything fun this summer at all, and you are looking for a reason to try Gen AI, just ask it what you should do. Ask it how to plan your trip. Ask it where you should visit. Ask it what you should take with you. Ask it what people do there that they were surprised by, and just play with it. Have fun with it. And I think that if you just take that little baby step into something you're already kind of naturally excited about, I think you'll be surprised, and that'll unlock the torrent of things to follow. Well, for those of you who listened, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Pure Signal. If you have more questions or want to reach out, feel free to visit us at the insights page at credera.com. Thank you guys so much.